For more than 2,000 years, one question has divided the religious world and generated some of the most intense debates in the history of theology. Is Jesus the Messiah promised in the Torah? For millions of Christians, the answer is unquestionable. Jesus not only fulfilled the messianic prophecies, but transformed the course of history, split the calendar in two, and forever changed the destiny of humanity. However, within traditional Judaism, his name remains a source of controversy, not redemption. The rabbis, jealous guardians of the Torah and meticulous experts in the Hebrew scriptures, have dedicated centuries to the deep study of every word, every prophecy and every promise related to the Messiah, and their verdict has been resounding. For them, Jesus is not the expected Messiah. This position opens a range of disturbing questions. If Jesus is truly the Messiah, how is it possible that those who have dedicated their lives to the study of the Torah and the prophets do not recognize him? Are we facing a problem of interpretation or revelation? Could it be that the rabbinic vision of the Messiah has been so shaped by centuries of tradition that it no longer fits with the reality of Jesus? Or is there a deeper reason, something spiritual that has veiled their eyes for generations? Dear listener, today we invite you to embark on a fascinating journey through history, theology, and biblical prophecy to discover the 7 deepest reasons why the rabbis reject Jesus as the Messiah. We will analyze their arguments, cite their sources, and contrast them with biblical, historical, and spiritual evidence that challenges their conclusions. Before continuing, we want to know your opinion. Do you believe the Jews are still God's chosen people? Leave us your comment. Let's get started.
Hey, my English not so good.
Do you mean my English isn't very good?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Without a doubt, Jesus is the most influential figure in history. His impact has marked a before and after in humanity, and his name continues to resonate powerfully throughout the centuries. No matter how much time passes, his message continues to be proclaimed, and millions of people around the world confess him as their Savior and the Messiah promised in the Scriptures. However, Jesus has not only been a symbol of faith and hope, but also the epicenter of one of the most intense theological debates in history. What Christians see as the perfect fulfillment of messianic prophecies, Judaism categorically rejects. For rabbinic tradition, the idea that Jesus is the Messiah is not only incorrect, but contradicts the interpretation of the Torah and the writings of the prophets. This brings us to a fundamental question. Why do the rabbis not accept Jesus as the Messiah? With this in mind, today we'll explore the 7 most important reasons why traditional Judaism rejects Jesus, analyze their arguments, and compare their positions with biblical and historical evidence. Number 1. Jesus did not fulfill key messianic prophecies. Since ancient times, Judaism has held that the Messiah must fulfill a series of unmistakable prophecies that will bring about a radical transformation in the world. According to the rabbinic view, Jesus could not have been the Messiah because he failed to bring about these changes. Rabbi Tovia Singer, one of Judaism's most prominent apologists, explains, "The Messiah is not a matter of faith or belief. His identity must be proven through verifiable events. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Zechariah gave us unequivocal proof. When the Messiah comes, there will be world peace. All Jews will be reunited in the land of Israel, and the temple will be rebuilt." Jesus did not accomplish any of this. The rabbis cite the following prophecies as proof. The Messiah will bring world peace, according to Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4. He will judge between the nations and rebuke many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, neither will they learn war anymore. The world remains mired in conflict, war, and division, which, in the eyes of the rabbis, demonstrates that the Messianic era has not yet begun. Since the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 after Christ, human history has been marked by countless wars, persecutions, and suffering. If the Messiah was to bring global peace where nations would stop fighting each other, as described in Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4, How could Jesus have been the Messiah if the world is still filled with violence? Rabbi Shmuel Goldstein, a prominent Talmudic teacher, states, if someone says that the Messiah has already come, ask him, where is peace? Where is the redemption of Israel? Because the Torah leaves no room for doubt. When the true Messiah comes, the wolf will dwell with the lamb, and violence will cease. But to this day, we continue to see bloodshed and war. For the rabbis, this is conclusive proof. The world has not experienced this kind of transformation under the influence of Jesus. Instead, history since his coming has been filled with persecutions, religious wars, and divisions even among Christians themselves. But is this really proof that Jesus isn't the Messiah? Or is there something deeper that's being overlooked? The rabbis also argue that the authentic Messiah must fulfill the mission of reuniting the entire Jewish people in the land of Israel. Citing Isaiah chapter 11, verse 12, they argue that this prophecy has not yet been fulfilled, since there are still millions of Jews living outside of Israel, which means that the Messiah has not arrived. Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, one of the most influential figures in 20th century Judaism, stated, when the true Messiah comes, there will be no more diaspora. Every Jew, without exception, will be gathered to the Holy Land, for this is what the prophets promised. Quoting Isaiah chapter 11, verse 12, he will set up an ensign for the nations and assemble the outcasts of Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Rabbinic Judaism interprets this verse as a literal and immediate event that must occur with the arrival of the Messiah. However, Jesus never carried out a mass exodus of Jews to Israel. In fact, after his ministry, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans in 70 after Christ, which led to the further dispersion of the Jewish people. For the rabbis, this is conclusive proof that Jesus cannot be the Messiah. Now, another argument used that Jesus does not fulfill the biblical prophecies is that the Messiah will rebuild the temple, quoting Ezekiel chapter 37, verses 26 and 27, which says, I will make a covenant of peace with them. It will be an everlasting covenant with them. I will establish them and multiply them, and I will set my sanctuary among them forever. My tabernacle will be among them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. They claim that the Second Temple was destroyed in 70 after Christ, and Jesus did not rebuild it. For Rabbinic Judaism, these points are irrefutable. Jesus did not bring world peace. He did not reunite all Jews in the land of Israel, and he did not rebuild the temple. So how can anyone claim to be the Messiah? Rabbi Maimonides, one of the most influential figures in Judaism, wrote in his work Mishneh Torah, saying, if a king arises from the house of David and studies the Torah, fulfills its commandments and leads Israel to observe the law, and if he fights the wars of the Lord, then we can assume that he is the Messiah. If he rebuilds the temple and gathers the exiles, then he is certainly the Messiah. For the rabbis, Jesus fulfilled none of these conditions. Instead, he was crucified, and his message was directed toward the Gentiles rather than restoring Israel's glory. Now, let's make a brief rebuttal. Rabbinic criticism is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of the Messiah according to Scripture. They expect a conquering king, but ignore the prophecies that describe the Messiah as a suffering servant before his final glorious manifestation. The biblical arguments are, in first place, the Messiah was to come twice, first to redeem and then to reign. Isaiah chapter 53, verses 3 to 5, presents the Messiah as the suffering servant, despised and burdened with the sin of the people before his exaltation. In Daniel chapter 9, verse 26, it prophesies that the Messiah would be cut off before the destruction of the Second Temple, which occurred in the year 70 after Christ. And Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9, announces his humble entry riding on a donkey, in contrast to his future coming in glory and judgment in Zechariah chapter 14, verse 4. Jesus fulfilled these prophecies at his first coming, but the establishment of the Messianic kingdom is still a future event, described in Revelation chapter 19, verses 11 to 16. In second place, the Messianic peace began spiritually and will be consummated in the future. Jesus brought peace between God and men. Let's read John chapter 14, verse 27. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you. Do not let your hearts be troubled, nor let them be afraid. The final world peace will be fulfilled at his second coming, Revelation chapter 21 verses 1 to 4, which will have a beginning in the millennial kingdom. In third place, the return of the Jews to Israel and the rebuilding of the temple are underway. Since 1948, Israel has been restored as a nation, which is considered part of the prophetic fulfillment of Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 24. The rebuilding of the temple is foretold in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4, and Revelation chapter 11, verses 1 and 2, pointing to events yet to unfold. Therefore, the rabbis await only the triumphant king and reject the suffering servant, failing to recognize that the Messiah was to fulfill both roles at different times. Jesus fulfilled the messianic prophecies in two stages, his first coming for redemption and his second coming for total restoration. What some see as a flaw in Jesus is actually the perfect execution of God's prophetic plan.
آثار الحبوب هو الحل. سيكا بلاس B5 بلس هو دايما الحل من لاروش بوزيه.
Number 2, the Messiah is not a divine being, but an earthly king. According to rabbinic tradition, the Messiah promised in the Hebrew scriptures must be a direct descendant of King David, who will restore Israel's sovereignty and establish a kingdom of peace and justice on earth. However, traditional Judaism does not consider the Messiah to be a divine being, but as a human being chosen by God to fulfill a specific mission. This concept is based on various messianic prophecies that present the Messiah as an earthly ruler who will bring national and global redemption. Jeremiah chapter 23 verses 5 and 6, which says, "Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, when I will raise up to David a righteous branch, and a king shall reign and prosper, and execute judgment and justice in the earth. In his days Judah will be saved, and Israel will dwell safely. And this is his name by which he will be called, Jehovah our righteousness." They also use passages such as Ezekiel chapter 37, verses 24 and 25, also Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 and 7, and finally Psalm chapter 72, verses 8 to 11. From these passages, the rabbis teach that the Messiah will be an earthly monarch who will restore Israel's political sovereignty, bring justice and world peace, exercise a visible and eternal reign from Jerusalem. Rabbi Moses Nachmanides, Ramban, who in his Barcelona disputation against the Christian cleric Paul Christiani in 1263 declared, "The Messiah we await will not be a god or the son of God, but a man born of a father and mother, like any other person. He will be a descendant of King David, who will bring political and spiritual redemption to Israel." Nachmanides, like other medieval and contemporary rabbis, rejected the idea of a divine Messiah because he believed that the Torah never presents a human being as God incarnate. In his commentary on the book of Deuteronomy, he emphasizes, God is one and shares his glory with no one. Belief in a divine Messiah contradicts the fundamental principles of Judaism. These arguments have been fundamental in rabbinic thought, establishing that the Messiah must be an earthly king and not a manifestation of God in the flesh. Now, this rabbinic position is consistent. The Hebrew scriptures present the Messiah not only as an earthly king, but also with divine nature. In Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, he prophesies that his name will be Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. These titles cannot refer to a mere human being, since terms like Mighty God and Everlasting Father are exclusive to God. In Micah chapter 5, verse 2, he declares, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are too small to be among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth are from of old, from everlasting." The Messiah will be born in Bethlehem, but his origin is from eternity, which indicates that his existence does not begin with his earthly birth. The prophet Jeremiah in chapter 23, verses 5 and 6 describes him as a righteous branch of David, who will bring justice and salvation to Israel. But what is most significant is that his name will be Jehovah, our righteousness. This implies that the Messiah not only represents God, but is identified with God himself. Another key passage is Psalm chapter 110, verse 1, where David says, The Lord said to my Lord, "Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet." Jesus used this verse to challenge the Pharisees in Matthew chapter 22, verses 41 to 46, asking how the Messiah can be the son of David if David himself calls him Lord. If the Messiah were only an earthly monarch, it would make no sense for David to recognize him as superior. The New Testament confirms the divine identity of the Messiah. Jesus fulfilled the messianic prophecies with his birth in Bethlehem, his ministry of justice and miracles, his death and resurrection, thus demonstrating his divine authority. The rabbinic rejection of a divine Messiah became especially entrenched after the 2nd century after Christ, when the Jewish leadership attempted to distance itself from Christianity. Ramban and other medieval rabbis insisted that the Messiah would be only a human king, arguing that the Torah does not allow for the incarnation of God. However, this position ignores passages such as Isaiah chapter 7 verse 14, which predicts that the Messiah would be called Emmanuel, God with us. The expectation of a purely earthly Messiah is not sufficient to explain the messianic prophecies. The Bible clearly teaches that the Messiah will not only restore the kingdom of Israel, but that he is God himself incarnated to bring salvation.
هذا أنت في كل يوم تخوض سباق تضع.
Number 3. The Messiah cannot die before fulfilling his mission. Judaism does not accept a Messiah who dies before restoring the world. The rabbis argue that Deuteronomy chapter 21 verse 23 disqualifies Jesus as the Messiah because it says that cursed by God is he who hangs on a tree. According to this interpretation, the fact that Jesus was crucified, hanged on a tree, proves that he could not have been the Messiah, since he would have been rejected by God instead of being his anointed. This argument has been developed by several rabbis throughout history. For example, Moses Maimonides, Rambam, 12th century, in his work Mishnah Torah, Hilchot Malachim 11:4, it mentions that the Messiah must restore Israel's sovereignty and bring peace to the world, something that failed to happen with Jesus. His death on the cross is seen as proof of his failure in this mission. Rabbi Moses Nachmanides, Ramban, 13th century, in the Disputation of Barcelona, 1263, argued that Jesus could not be the Messiah because he died in a manner described in the Torah as a curse. According to him, God would not allow his anointed to suffer such shame. The Talmud in Sanhedrin 43a mentions the execution of Jesus and suggests that he was condemned for witchcraft and idolatry, which reinforces the rabbinic view that his death was not a redemptive sacrifice, but a punishment. Now, refutation from the Bible and the New Testament. Despite this rabbinic argument, the Bible shows that the death of the Messiah was part of the divine plan. In Isaiah chapter 53, verses 3 through 5, he describes God's suffering servant who would be despised and rejected, wounded for our transgressions, and bruised for our iniquities. In Psalm chapter 22, verse 16, it prophesies, "For dogs have surrounded me, a band of evildoers has encircled me. They have pierced my hands and my feet." In Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10, it says that Israel will eventually look upon him whom they pierced, implying that the Messiah would be pierced before his final recognition. Furthermore, the Apostle Paul directly answers this argument in Galatians chapter 3, verse 13, explaining that Jesus took upon himself the curse of the law to redeem humanity. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us, for it is written, "Cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree." Therefore, the rabbinic objection is based on a partial reading of Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 23, without considering the messianic context of redemptive suffering. While the rabbis view crucifixion as a disqualification, the Bible presents it as the fulfillment of God's plan for the salvation of humanity. Number 4, the Torah is eternal, and Jesus changed it. One of the main rabbinical arguments against Jesus as Messiah is that he changed the Torah, something that is prohibited in Judaism. The law of Moses is considered eternal and immutable, as stated in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 32. "All that I command you, you shall be careful to do. You shall not add to it nor take away from it." In rabbinic tradition, this principle means that anyone who changes the Torah cannot be sent by God. Rabbis argue that Jesus altered the law on several occasions, which disqualifies him as the Messiah. Examples where Jesus allegedly modified the Torah teaching on murder and anger recorded in Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 and 22. You have heard that it was said to those long ago, "You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be subject to judgment." But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother will be subject to the judgment, and whoever says to his brother, "You fool," will be subject to the council, and whoever says to him, "You fool," will be subject to the fire of hell. The rabbis view this statement as an alteration of the law by adding a new moral dimension to the prohibition of murder. Another declaration on clean and unclean foods. In Mark chapter 7, verses 18 and 19, Jesus taught, "Do you not understand that whatever enters a man from outside cannot defile him?" The verse concludes with, "This he said, making all foods clean." For Judaism, this directly contradicts Leviticus chapter 11, where God establishes which foods are impure. The rabbinic perspective on the immutability of the Torah. The medieval rabbis reinforced this idea in their writings. Moses Maimonides, in his Mishnah Torah, Hilchot Yesodei HaTorah 9:1 says, "The Torah given by Moses is eternal and immutable. Any prophet who attempts to change it is a false prophet." For Maimonides, any attempt to reinterpret the Torah is proof that Jesus could not have been the Messiah. Rabbi Moses Nachmanides in the Barcelona Disputation, 1263, says, "The Messiah must follow the Torah and reinforce it, not modify it." Jesus broke the Sabbath and changed the dietary laws, which proves that he could not be the Messiah. The Talmud, Shabbat 116a, mentions that Jesus' followers, the Minim, distorted the law and promoted new teachings. Now, let us look at the refutation from the New Testament. Despite these accusations, Jesus did not abolish the Torah, but rather brought it to fulfillment. Jesus affirmed the validity of the law in Matthew chapter 5, verse 17. "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill." This means that Jesus did not do away with the Torah, but rather showed its deeper meaning. Jesus interpreted the law with messianic authority. In Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 to 48, Jesus doesn't change the law, but rather elevates it to its fullest moral expression. For example, not only is murder sinful, but so is hatred in the heart. Now, the new covenant was prophesied in the Torah. In Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 31 to 33, it predicts that God would make a new covenant with Israel, writing his law on their hearts. Jesus came to establish this new covenant through his sacrifice. Let's read Luke chapter 22, verse 20 says, "In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, 'This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you.'" Therefore, the rabbinic argument that Jesus modified the Torah is based on a strictly legalistic view, but ignores that the Messiah's mission included fulfilling the law and establishing a new covenant. Jesus did not destroy the law, but fulfilled it and revealed its ultimate purpose, as prophesied in the Hebrew Scriptures. Number 5. Isaiah 53. Does not speak of Jesus, but of Israel. Traditional rabbis hold that Isaiah 53 is not a prophecy about an individual Messiah, but rather describes the suffering of the people of Israel in exile. This interpretation is based on the identification of the servant of Yahweh with the nation of Israel, a recurring idea in the book of Isaiah. The rabbinic basis for the national interpretation of Isaiah 53, context of the servant songs in Isaiah 53. It is part of a series of passages known as the servant songs in Isaiah chapters 42, 49, 50, and 53. In several of these passages, the servant is explicitly identified as Israel. Let us read Isaiah chapter 49, verse 3. "And he said to me, 'You are my servant, O Israel, in whom I will be glorified.'" The rabbis argue that since Isaiah elsewhere identifies the servant with Israel, it is logical to interpret Isaiah 53 in the same way. The suffering servant as Israel in exile, rabbinic interpretation holds that Isaiah 53 describes Israel's sufferings at the hands of the nations. The idea is that the Jewish people have suffered unjustly, have been punished, and have borne the guilt of the world, but will ultimately be vindicated by God. The Targum of Isaiah, an ancient Aramaic paraphrase of the prophets, interprets Isaiah 53 in collective terms, applying it to Israel. Likewise, Rabbi Saadia Gaon and Rabbi Rashi stated that the servant is Israel, not an individual. Rashi comments on Isaiah 53. This chapter speaks of the nation of Israel, which has been stricken and punished in exile. Ibn Ezra also supports the national interpretation, seeing the passage as a reference to the suffering of the people of Israel under the oppression of the nations. Radak, Rabbi David Kimhi, argues that Isaiah 53 is a reference to Jews who suffer unjustly but will be vindicated in messianic times. The rabbis offer several objections to the Christian interpretation of Isaiah 53. The servant suffers for our transgressions. If the servant is the Messiah, why would the Jews suffer in his place? The servant is described as without violence. Israel has participated in wars and conflicts, so this could not refer to Jesus, who was also accused of disturbing the order. The servant is rewarded with descendants and a long life, and they claim that Jesus had no descendants, nor did he live a long earthly life. Now, let us refute this interpretive error. Isaiah 53 speaks of Jesus and not of Israel. Despite the rabbinic interpretation, there are strong arguments that indicate that Isaiah 53 cannot refer to Israel, but to a specific individual, the Messiah. The servant is distinct from Israel. Although Israel is called servant in other passages, Isaiah 53 describes it differently. In verse 8 of Isaiah 53 it says, "He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who can declare his generation? For he was cut off from the land of the living, and he was stricken for the transgression of my people." We underline, "For the transgression of my people he was stricken." Here, the servant suffers in place of the people of Israel. If the servant were Israel, the text would read, "For the transgression of the nations." In verse 12 of the same chapter it says, "Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong. For he poured out his soul unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. And he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors." Once again, we emphasize the expression, "He poured out his life unto death." Israel as a nation has not died collectively. The passage speaks of the literal death of an individual. That's why the servant dies and atones for sins, as verse 5 says, "But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement that brought us peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed." Atonement for sins in the Torah is made through individual sacrifices, not through the suffering of an entire nation. In verse 10 it says, "Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him by putting him to grief. When he makes his soul an offering for sin, he will see his offspring. He will prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hand." This fits with the New Testament teaching about Jesus as the Lamb of God. Some ancient rabbinic texts applied Isaiah 53 to the Messiah, not to Israel. In the Talmud, Sanhedrin 98b, there is mention of a Messiah called the leper, who suffers for the sins of Israel, reflecting the image of the suffering servant in Isaiah 53. The Midrash Rabbah on Ruth chapter 5 verse 6 also describes the Messiah as one who suffers to atone for the sins of the people. In Kabbalistic literature, the Zohar, Vayikra 177b, states that the Messiah will bear the punishments for the sins of Israel, an idea very close to the Christian interpretation. Even Maimonides, although he did not apply Isaiah 53 to Jesus, acknowledged that some rabbinic texts linked the Messiah with vicarious sufferings, which shows that the idea of a suffering Messiah is not alien to ancient Judaism. Thus, the rabbinic interpretation of Isaiah 53 as a reference to Israel has grounds in Jewish tradition, but presents inconsistencies with the text. Isaiah 53 describes an innocent individual who suffers for the sins of others, dies, and is then exalted, something that fits with the figure of Jesus in the New Testament. Furthermore, ancient rabbinic sources recognize the possibility of a suffering Messiah. Therefore, the Christian interpretation of Isaiah 53 as a messianic prophecy is more consistent with the biblical text and theology. Number 6. Christianity broke with Judaism. The rabbis maintain that Christianity ceased to be part of Judaism, because of its rejection of Torah observance and its openness to Gentiles without requiring them to observe the Mosaic law. This was cemented after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 after Christ, when Rabbinic Judaism took religious authority over the Jewish people. The main points of the rabbinic argument are: Christianity abandons the Torah. In Acts 15, the apostles decided that Gentiles were not required to keep the law of Moses. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, Jesus said that he did not come to abolish the law, but early Christianity interpreted his teaching as the final fulfillment of the Torah in his person. Christianity introduced new doctrines incompatible with Judaism. The Trinity contradicts the absolute monotheism of Judaism. Christian soteriology emphasizes salvation by grace through faith in Jesus, while Judaism maintains that the relationship with God is based on observance of the Torah. After the destruction of the temple, Jewish religious leadership fell to the Pharisees, who developed Rabbinic Judaism. Texts such as the Birkat Hamanim, a curse against heretics in the Amida, were added in the 2nd century to exclude Christians from synagogues. In his work Mishneh Torah, Maimonides describes Jesus as someone who led many to stray from the law. Jesus of Nazareth thought he was the Messiah, and he was executed by the court. Daniel had already prophesied about him, and the rebels among your people will raise a vision, but they will fall. According to Maimonides, Jesus could not have been the Messiah because he did not restore Israel's sovereignty or bring world peace. Rabbi Yaakov Emden. In his work, Seder Olam Rabbah, he acknowledges that Christianity helped spread the knowledge of God among the Gentiles, but sees it as a distortion of Jewish truth. Although Christians have brought many nations to recognize the Creator, their religion is in error and does not follow the path of Israel. Now, we present the Christian refutation. Christianity is the fulfillment of Judaism. From the Christian perspective, Christianity is not a religion separate from Judaism, but its final fulfillment in the person of Jesus. Jesus did not break the Torah, but fulfilled it. The new covenant promised in Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 31 to 34, speaks of a renewal of God's relationship with his people, written on their hearts instead of on tablets of stone. Furthermore, Christianity includes Gentiles by prophecy. Isaiah chapter 49, verse 6, prophesies that the Messiah will be a light to the nations. In Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, God tells Abraham, "In you all the families of the earth will be blessed." For its part, the doctrine of the Trinity does not deny monotheism. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, God says, "Let us make man in our image." In Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, the Messiah is called Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Now it must be understood that Peter, Paul, and the apostles were observant Jews. In Acts 2, thousands of Jews accepted Jesus as the Messiah at Pentecost. Therefore, Rabbinic Judaism argues that Christianity became a separate religion because of its rejection of the Torah, its doctrine about Jesus, and its acceptance of Gentiles without requiring the Mosaic law. However, from a Christian perspective, Jesus fulfilled the law and the messianic prophecies, and the inclusion of Gentiles was foreseen in God's plan. Rather than a break, Christianity is a continuation of the divine purpose revealed in the Old Testament. Number 7. Jesus was not accepted by the rabbis of his time. Traditional Judaism holds that if Jesus had truly been the Messiah, the rabbis and religious leaders of his time would have recognized him. His rejection by the Sanhedrin is proof that he failed to live up to Jewish messianic expectations. The rabbis argue the Sanhedrin and the rabbis rejected Jesus. According to the Gospel of John, the Pharisees and Sadducees opposed Jesus, showing that Israel's spiritual leaders did not consider him the Messiah. In Matthew chapter 26, verses 59 to 66, the Sanhedrin condemned him for blasphemy when he claimed to be the Son of God. According to Rabbinic Judaism, the true Messiah will be accepted by Israel and will bring immediate redemption. Jesus was rejected by most Jews of his time, indicating that he did not fulfill the messianic role. They also argue that the Talmud mentions Jesus in a negative context. In Sanhedrin 43a, it is mentioned that Jesus was executed for practicing sorcery and for leading Israel astray. In Gittin 57a, he is spoken of as being in hell boiling in excrement, which shows the rabbinic rejection of him. Now, Christian refutation, Jesus' rejection by the rabbis, was prophesied from a Christian perspective. The fact that Jesus was rejected by the religious leaders of his time does not prove that he is not the Messiah. On the contrary, the Hebrew scriptures prophesied that the Messiah would be rejected by his own people. The prophets predicted that the Messiah would be rejected in Isaiah chapter 53, verse 3. Despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, and acquainted with grief. In Psalm chapter 118, verse 22, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. In Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10, they will look on me, whom they have pierced, and they will mourn as one mourns for an only son. The Bible shows that the Messiah would initially be rejected by his own people before being recognized later. Now, the Gospels show that many Jews did believe in Jesus, including Pharisees like Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. Acts chapter 2, verse 41 says that 3,000 Jews believed in Jesus at Pentecost. Religious leaders had political motives to reject Jesus. In John chapter 11, verses 47 to 53 shows that the Sanhedrin feared that Jesus' preaching would provoke a reaction from the Romans against the Jewish people. In Matthew chapter 27, verse 18, it says that Pilate knew that the priests had handed him over out of envy. Rabbi Yaakov Emden admitted that Christianity helped nations come to know God. Jesus strengthened the Torah of Moses and did not remove a single letter. Therefore, the rabbinic argument that Jesus was not accepted by the religious leaders of his time as proof that he is not the Messiah ignores that the Hebrew scriptures prophesied his initial rejection. Furthermore, the Sanhedrin had political interests in condemning him, and many Jews did believe in him. From a Christian perspective, this rejection doesn't prove that Jesus isn't the Messiah, but rather confirms what was prophesied in the Bible. Dear listeners, as you can see, this idea leads us to a troubling prophetic reality. By rejecting Jesus as the true Messiah based on rabbinic arguments that emphasize tradition and human interpretation of the Torah, many Jews in the future will be open to accepting anyone who comes in his own name, just as Jesus himself warned in John chapter 5, verse 43. I have come in my Father's name, and you do not receive me. If another comes in his own name, you will receive him. This deception will be part of the grand prophetic scenario the Bible reveals to us, in which the Antichrist will present himself as a leader who will bring apparent peace and solutions to the world, gaining the trust of many nations, including Israel. However, his true nature will be revealed when he seeks to establish his dominance and demand worship. It is crucial that we pay attention to these signs and affirm our faith in the true Messiah, Jesus Christ, who fulfilled all the messianic prophecies and will come again in glory. We've reached the end of this video. We hope it's been a great blessing to your life. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next video. May God bless you.